Hey, Don, the Auction Professor here. Today we're going to talk about records. I'm going to show you a bunch of records today. We're going to try and get you familiar with some of the labels, things not to look for, and things to look for. There's some major things you can look for that will really cut your time down and save you a lot of aggravation. This will stop you from buying junk records, and it'll help you out in cutting down your time and maybe giving you some more motivation when you find a record easier than looking through huge stacks of record with no idea what to look for. But we'll go to the screen and we're going to talk about records today.
Okay, so there's a lot to do with records. There's a lot of things you need to know to really narrow in on the best records. I've been selling records for years, so for me, I can look at like a 5,000 group lot of records and only have a couple, maybe 50, maybe at the very, very most 100 that I have never seen or have no clue on, or I can't remember the price. Sometimes I can look through thousands and only have 5 or 6, depending on who's went through them before me or who owned them or any issues like that. So records, you have to know something on the records or have a very quick ability to search through these online, because otherwise you're going to be sitting in a group of records for days. For me, I can literally just instantly look at a record and slide it right off my hands, knowing whether it's worth looking up or not. I'll pull out the good ones while I'm looking through them. I'm not going to look them up while I'm sorting them. I'll pull out all the ones that I am not sure on and set those in a stack on its own. That's usually what I do. If it's you're going to a buy and you can buy individual ones and that's all you have to buy, you don't have to buy the entire lot, that's what you want to do no matter what. And then you can narrow it down instantly by getting rid of the ones that aren't worth much money. For the most part, any new modern 1970s or above country record isn't worth hardly anything. Most pop records are not worth anything. Most new records aren't worth that much either. So you can eliminate, 80s and up for the most part on most common labels with most common artists. If you've heard of the artist, chances are it's not worth a lot of money. That's just the way it is for the most part. Obviously, Elvis Presley does have some records that sell into the thousands, but they're very specific records on a very specific label, such as the Sun label. Look up Sun. Some of what we're going to go over today, I want you to look up if you really want to know this. If you're serious about making big money on records, you're going to have to look stuff up. So if I tell you to look something up, I'm not going to give you every piece of information in this video. Some of it you should actually go and look up yourself if you want to learn this. If you don't want to learn and don't want to spend any time into an area that has a over 50% sell-through rate, that, religiously has records selling every day of the week into the thousands, records that anybody can find. It just takes you the hard work to do it. If you don't want to do that, skip the video. But you're going to have to put in the work. There's no way around it with doing this category. It's not like clothing or something where you can have a generalized rule of a brand or something. It doesn't work that way for the most part. When I buy records, there's one issue that you want to be aware of. If there's warps or damage to the most records or it's cracked, 99% of every record that has warped of any kind or cracked isn't worth much at all, and don't mess with it. There are some exceptions, and I'm going to show you one today in just a little bit here. But for the most part, I wouldn't mess with that. I have bought cracked 78 records and still made good money. But these are records that are horrendously rare and very rarely sell ever. Maybe one every 5 years might show up, and the record's probably worth $5,000 or more for it to be worth anything if it's cracked. Just keep that in mind. If the record's cracked or warped and it's not worth into the thousands, don't buy it. But again, as I said, we will show you one here. When I started buying records, it was years before I went full-time. I liked music. My parents had a large record collection, and I bought records because music when I was a kid was on records. You didn't have many tapes. They had 8 tracks out. Cassettes were still out at that point, but most people didn't have a cassette player when I was a kid in the 70s and stuff. It was a luxury item. My family never had a lot of money, so I never experienced stuff like that until I was older and working on my own. So, records was what it was. So I've bought records for years, to listen to for the most part. I don't really listen to many other than the rarities that I record copies of for myself or for compilation CDs, which in some cases you can legally sell depending on the patents and who owns this and who owns that and how old the music is. But I'm not going to go into that. That's another avenue of making money. But I got records when I was a kid, so I've always bought them. So for me, I have an overall understanding on the entire aspect of records. They've been around me since my earliest memories I can remember. My earliest photo of me has a record player in it. So, that's just something that I've been, attached to some extent. Part of my college work was on records. I may post a college assignment just because I had somebody ask, but I've written many essays and theses on influence of music and things along that line. I'm a very big music buff. You might call me an audiophile to some extent, but not overall. I'm not nitpicky on records as much on the ones that I get. I don't mind if there's a few pops in it. It just reminds me of the good old times when we used to rock out to some, Led Zeppelin or something on the turntable or something. But anyway, record-wise, I didn't have a clue when I first started, what's worth anything. I ran across a Edwin Starr. Now, this is something you can look up and you're not going to find anymore on PopPsych for decent money. PopPsych purges their account every so often, every so many years. All the information prior to a certain date is gone. Now, I'm telling you this because anybody using PopPsych is missing some information in the history and historical information that may have been available 15 years ago. I've been on PopPsych for a long time, prior to me going full-time. Somebody else I knew had an account, and it was kind of neat, and I used to hunt down, records, and not to sell per se at the time, because we weren't really big into that, but, so, I know about PopPsych. I remember the history. I've sold records, for quite a while here and there. So PopPsych does purge their account. There's 4 main sites that I use for records. The first one is eBay, obviously. I do sell on Amazon, but there's no way to really use Amazon for record sales history. It just isn't a feasible endeavor, and I just drop Amazon out of the picture. Prices are so weird on Amazon. We sell a lot of records that don't sell anywhere else other than on Amazon for those prices. So, it's a niche for us for selling some of these early records on Amazon. But mostly what we sell, the high dollar and, way overboard on records on Amazon is 78. So I'll touch base with those maybe in the end of this here if we have time. Otherwise, I'll do a separate video on just 78s, because 78s I make a ton of money on. Higher dollar items that show up quicker and easier, though, are 45. So I'm showing you 45s first. But again, there's 4 sites. You got eBay, PopPsych, Manships. Now, most people have never heard of Manships. Manships sells rare records, and you can actually see and look through his list of things, and he has prices on there. Now, he sells on eBay, as far as I know, too. He has his own private auctions, I think, too, and they do these international auctions. I believe it's a British site. I think I bought a price guide from him before 2 years back. But his site can be helpful too. And then the last site is Discogs. And Discogs does have quite a few records on it. And you can do fairly well on Discogs. You're not going to make a fortune off Discogs. You could not live off Discogs unless you have like 100,000 records up or some high amount. We do sell 10 or 15 a day, on average, but they're cheaper records on Discogs. So it's worth having a Discogs if you're going to be cross listing stuff, so listing them on, eBay and maybe Discogs, or eBay, Amazon, and Discogs. And we do have records that show up on all 3 sites, so, that's just something you can do. It increases your odds in selling stuff. It's not a huge increase, so, 10, 15 records a day isn't a huge amount. You're not going to live on that again. But that's how it works, is combining these. Now, I'm not going to go into Manships today at all. Manships is a hit or miss, because if he doesn't have it in stock, you're not going to see a price, usually. There's other ways you can log in and get an account and all that stuff. I do have an account, but I'm not going to mess with that today. That's something you can, go off on your own, because Manships isn't a huge plus to pricing records. Usually the 3 main ones are eBay, PopPsych, and Discogs. Now, Discogs I use to determine, sometimes you won't find records on eBay or PopPsych. Generally, if they're not on PopPsych, they're not worth very much money for the most part, because PopPsych has gotten so much better in pulling in prices, other than like some of the smaller like auction houses that sell oddly, a record here, record there, or maybe just sell once or twice a year. They don't allow people to have access. They're ones that maybe print up books on their stuff, and they sell access to their own research and information. So you can't get it, tied into another site for the most part. But PopPsych is the bomb when it comes to researching prices. Now, with PopPsych 2, one thing you need to take into account is the date that the sale was made. So if the sale was made, past a certain point, prices do drop. So you just got to take that into account. Now, when you're looking at records, the label means a big difference. Now, there's some labels that are very common that have some high dollar songs on it. Like King is a fairly common label. But this one, obviously, they only made a handful. It's a very rare record. This is one we'll look at first here, and we'll go off of that one here. Junior McCants, is a very, very rare record. This is one of the very few that's worth, 10 grand at some points. There's a couple other ones. There's a Zebra labeled 45 that's worth a ton of money. It goes 10 grand or better. You can look this one up yourself to get a better idea on the history of this record and such forth. But this is a well-known. Anybody who's into records knows this record. And it's just something you always look for. This is like the grail of records. There's more than just this one that are worth, a ton of money. So I've got a long list in my head. I've done this so long that, I can remember stuff like that. And I look into this. I believe this one's actually cracked. Yeah. See, this one here is on several sites right now. Again, this one could still show up, and this one could sell at this price, even cracked, just because it's such a rare record. Same gentleman has it right here. Cracked record, the In Groove, and he's got a video of this record actually there too. But I'm going to show you the PopPsych ones that have sold. Now, in 2008, that record went for $15,000. Not that same copy, obviously, but the same exact pressing of the record. And again, it wasn't even in mint condition for what the record is. It's a very scarce record. Started it off, $10 on this record. Let's see if this person knew it was worth that much money. Maybe not. It's hard to say. He may not have known. It's hard to say. But let's go back up and talk about the subject. Okay, and this is the rating. It tells you if it's a low price. It tells you if it's a low price. If you highlight rate it, it'll give you a judge on the price here. So if it's got 1 dot, it's very high. And if you look at the middle, it's 3 dots, it's average price for that record. So the average price in 2008 for this record, based on 45 votes, which is pretty darn good, that's a very good judge on what this record should sell for. So if you're looking up a record and you doubt, you've got record prices all over the board on these, use the rate here. Rate it. Look at the rating and see what you think. If it's rated at this rate, at an average price for that record with 45 votes, I would trust the judgment, because these are people like me who sell the records and who know what they usually go for. But this record sells for $15,000 in 2008. Now, again, this is why I say you need to look at dates of the record being sold. But when you look at Junior McCant, for example, this is just one example, the price changes by the time it was up. Here's 2008, 15,000, 2006, 17,000, and then you've got them 6,000 for the same record. Then you've got them for like 6,000 for the same record, the newer the time frame is. So the prices do fluctuate on these. No one's rated this one here. I'm not sure why it hasn't been rated. But the price can drop drastically depending on the time frame. Now, on these records, there's only a limited number of people who are going to pay $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. There may only be 3 people in the world who would pay something like this, or $4,000. So that's why I say you've got to check when it's sold for that price. An 8-year-ago price or a 9-year-ago price or a 10-year-ago price may not have any relevance on what it goes for today. And that's another reason why PopPsych, gets rid of and flushes out the older auctions and details on some of these throughout time. And I know this for a fact because I've sold records, in the past years and years ago that are no longer on here. So, and I know what some records went for in the past and what they used to show up for on PopPsych. So, I have some insider information more than just looking at the site and saying, hey, this is how it is. But when you're looking at 45s, I center in on a topic usually, and 45s, the best area to find a 45 are the ones that are you're going to find that sell the easiest, the quickest, and for the most money are sold 45s. Literally, those sell the best anywhere you look. Any site you're looking at, Soul 45s sell the best. They sell for the highest. I make the most money on those religiously across the board. For whatever I sell record-wise, the Soul 45s sell the best every time. No question about it whatsoever. I'm just going to start it here to make sure. Now, you only can look at 25,000 or so at a time here. Right here tells you how many more are there. But usually after the first 25,000, the price drops so drastically, it's not even funny. Now, when I'm searching this way too, you're not going to get every record that's priced in this price range. I'm just giving you a generalized look. If you look at, listings, if they don't have the word sold and 45 in the listing title, it's not going to show up here. So this is just an overall. So if I get rid of 45, you can center in more on higher dollar ones that might not show up otherwise. This is going to list LPs and stuff as well too, so you can look at this way as well too. So it just depends on your feeling. Like this one here, I found this record. Mine wasn't the best copy. It doesn't sell for that much anymore. 6,100. I think I got like $2,600 for the one that I had. So there are some LPs that you want to look for too, but overall, I make the most money out of all my records on soul or jazz. Jazz if they're 78s, soul if they're 45s. I've sold LPs, as I said, for thousands of dollars as well too. But what you want to start to do is look through these labels. Type in soul or soul 45 on eBay and on PopPsych. Don't worry about Discogs yet. Discogs I mostly use to tell what the cheap records are and things that I don't really want to list on eBay or Amazon. If I see them on Discogs, a bunch of something that are going real low dollar, I'm not going to mess with it. Usually what people do, like me, that sell a ton of records and big, huge record dealers, what they can't sell on eBay and what they can't sell on Amazon or somewhere or on their own site, they're going to throw it on Discogs. Discogs can sell you high dollar records, but for the most part, the high end collectors are going to be on eBay and some of these other places, or even Manships, which I showed you earlier. But he's mostly someone that sells himself, so his information isn't really great. He doesn't care. He's not doing this to give us information on it. There used to be a top 500 of the rarest soul records, and I think he had something to do with that too, but it was like $5 million worth of records considered in that top 500. So, he's an integral part of the record industry and records and such forth, and I do use him myself. But again, that's for the novice one really doesn't need to mess with that too much. But again, look through these labels here. Spend your time looking at these labels, or spend your time Or let's say you bought a big bunch of records. Use that as your example. Invest in a few records, or spend some time in a store and look up some records that you run into. And you're going to have to do this a few times to kind of get a gist on which ones not to look for. Like Elvis, for the most part, isn't worth much money. Beatles, for the most part, a common Beatles record like on a Capitol Swirl label or something isn't worth much money. It's select ones that are. So I don't really even mess with Beatles, or for the most part, when you run across a Beatles record, unless it's like a dime or something, I don't mess with it either. I can flip through those real quick. I know which labels to look for. Beatles have some records that are primo records, but again, they're different labels. They're not the common ones. All the common records that you run into, for the most part, there's only a very small percentage of records that you're going to run into that are worth really anything. But you might see a big, huge lot of something and be able to buy, 1,000 records for $50, $100. It's probably worth doing just for your educational purposes, I would guess at this point. For me, I wouldn't do that. I kind of take enough look through them to see. But labels are what matters for the most part. And you see some of the prices on here. Another way to tell on records is the name of the artist, obviously. But the word "the" in a lot of music can add, to the value. Like here is one here. He's got Soulhead in there, which is the name of the title. But Soul Seekers, it's actually the Soul Seekers. I look for the word the groups. For some of these oddball ones too, and sometimes that can give you a hint on what type of music it is. A lot of country bands don't have the word "the" in it. A lot of country bands don't have the word "the" in it, so that's a good judge on some of these here, like the Dell Tours and things like that. So that's a help sometimes too. But the labels are what I've looked. I've researched labels before I ever go out to look for records. I usually look for the ones that are in my town. I'll type in Ohio in the music section, or Ohio 45. Now eBay's different. You can keep the word or keep 45 in the title to look for stuff. So I usually looked for, in the beginning, records that should show up in Ohio. I typed in Ohio records, and then I looked at the labels to see which ones. And sure enough, these do show up. I've had Blue Ash, Wham, every one of the labels you see here that are in the Ohio section, I find in Ohio. That's just a way you can see. And again, you're going to run across like this one here I've never seen. Unknown Ohio Garage Funk. Now, these are ones that someone probably had 50 or 100 pressed for their band. They weren't very good. They never went anywhere. They didn't tour, but they thought, hey, we're going to be big stars, and they had records pressed out of their own pocket. Now, you'll see that here, too. But again, this is how I start. This is how I've started into records. I looked for what I should find locally and what went for good money. Like this one here shows up. This one shows up. I know all these labels. Every one of these ones you see in the Ohio section, I know because I see them. And it gave me an idea on what to look for. So I looked for these rare labels. I determined in a very short time, a week or so, all the common labels that I wanted to ignore. And then it took a little longer to determine, some of the common singers that are rare. And that's what you need to do. You need to do the research to do this. Do a search. If you're serious about records and you have a place that that you always run into records, start there. Find a spot where you're going to see a ton of records. Just for your learning the records. Because I can go to flea markets, garage sales, records show up everywhere. That is the one thing that you can find at every thrift store, around here anyway. Even Sabres had records on the wall. They're usually in bags, and I'd have to slide through the bag to see what's in the bag, but that's what I did. I didn't care if I had to do that. And other people did it too, because I always saw bags that had a little rip in it so you can fan them out to see what the records were inside. Always. Every time I've seen it at Sabres, unless I was the first one, and then I did that. But you see records everywhere, so pick an area that has a bunch of records. Flip through a bunch of them if that's what it takes. If it's somebody you've heard of, chances are it's not worth a lot of money. That's just the facts of the matter. All the common people, even some of the vintage ones, Chuck Berry ones for the most part aren't worth money. Most of the Elvis aren't worth a lot of money. Neil Sedaka, Paul Simon, all these things just are common records for the most part. Unless it's a promo, then you might want to look it up. But most of that stuff isn't worth much money. Like a Led Zeppelin 45, most common ones are, just a couple bucks if that, and I don't buy them. A good Led Zeppelin on maybe an Atlantic label may go for $10, or 40 at the most. Led Zeppelin even doesn't sell. A lot of the vintage 60s don't sell, the common ones. It just depends on who it is. You're just going to have to get the gist on eliminating things that you don't want to mess with. Most country doesn't sell. Again, rare records are what you're looking for, and those are going to be on scarce labels that you've never seen, have never heard, that may not even show up on eBay. I have Pop Psych on my phone. So, whether I have to look at it through a web browser on my phone or what the case may be, I do use Pop Psych while I'm out too, just to get a general gist sometimes. But for the most part, when I'm looking at a big bunch of records these days, I don't have to look up most of them. I might buy a small stack of them, and that's what I buy. Unless I can get a good deal on a huge stack of them, and I know there's enough to get my money back and pay for my time and make a profit. That's the only time I really buy the big lots anymore. And I have bought quite a few big lots lately because the profit was there. Don't go hog wild. If you've got the money and you want to learn this category and you don't mind buying a huge lot to spend your time researching to kind of judge for yourself on what to look for, be my guest. But just be cautious to not lose money when you're doing this, or to have the money to spend on it to blow out on these. Keep that in mind. This is going to be investment in time, if nothing else. You're going to invest time into figuring out which records are worth money. That's just the way it is. Start yourself looking for what's going to show up in your local area. And again, you're going to find records from 1,000 miles away in there too, but those are going to be scarce and far between. Look up literally soul records, soul 45. Soul records, you're going to make the most money in, regardless of whatever else is going on. Soul records almost always is where I make my money. The next category for 45s that makes the most money for me are rockabilly. Rockabilly I've gotten into. I do like some songs. If you want an example of probably one of the best new rockabilly songs out there, it's the Baboons and Drinking Gasoline. Now, this is a German group. They mostly German. It's a real good song, though. It's a new hit for me. I have it on one of my playlists. But again, Baboons and Drinking Gasoline. Now, that's a perfect example of a rockabilly. Even for the 50s, it sounds like a rockabilly from the 50s. It sounds like a Johnny Cash, but a real heavy, twangy version of Johnny Cash in my book. But listen to that. That'll give you an idea of what Rockabilly is. And it's a new one. You might like it. Rockabilly, again, is the second one. And I say that because a lot of the people who are in the Rockabilly high dollar records are people that you may have heard of to some extent, like Elvis Presley records sell. I've sold him on Sun. There's differences in the versions of Sun records that there are. There's a push mark on some of their 3 push marks on the rare ones. I'll go into that again in another video because there's a lot to know on some of these. But I'm giving you the gist on it. The gist on the areas to center in on. And again, look through here and kind of see and judge on the labels. Now, like this Meteor label, this label here has a ton of good records on it. So it's not a common label. You very rarely run into it, but they made a ton of records. So it's just they're scarce. They didn't press a lot of each record, and they didn't survive. So the Meteor label is one that I always look for. Every time I see a Meteor label, I pull it out. But look up Sun Record. Look up what the label looks like. Another good one here. I look at every single Republic label that I ever see. Republic has probably the most Rockabilly records that I've ever sold on it. They're just good on Rockabilly. It's an early country label, 50s, and a lot of Rockabilly are on that label. So, these are just something you want to look for. Look for these, type in these search results. Type in Rockabilly, type in soul, and you're going to find a ton of records on you. Here's a good example of the Sun record here. Blue Hand, another one that I sell quite a few on this label here too. So, you've got to do these searches here. This is going to give you an idea. Now, these are labels that you're probably never going to see unless you really dig in and do what we do. Flip, another good label that you want to look for. Flip, Century, another good label you want to look for. So when you're finding these kind of labels, these are the ones you're going to pull out and only look up the ones you see on these labels. Like Carl Perkins, Movie Mag. I know this record. I've had it. Carl Perkins is another one of those. He has records like Matchbox and things that don't sell for a ton of money, but then again, you run across the ones that have high dollar value. But for the most part, most records are fairly common. Keep that in mind. Only look for, like, here's another one. I've had this one too. This is about typical. I got $4.50 for mine. Again, another Sun label. There's so many labels. You're just going to have to research it, but do a research like this. Do this research. Research Rockabilly 45s on eBay. Research Soul 45s on eBay, and get a gist on what the labels you're looking for are. Starday can be another one, but the majority of Stardays aren't worth anything. Just look through these. Do a research on this. Labels are what you're going to do and know the best. RCA, for the most part, this label here isn't worth much for the most part, but then you're going to run into some that are a very rare artist that might be worth $1,000. But it's going to be somebody you've never heard of. That's the key. Another one, Meteor. Charlie Feathers always sells. I've had Charlie Feathers records many times that sell for $400. But it's, again, the Meteor label. I would have pulled it just because of the label and then looked it up. Pull out the labels. If you want to get going into this, like Kuka, another one that has some great records on it that sell very high. If you're going to get into this, what you really want to do is know the labels. You may miss some, as I said, just by sheer not looking at every record and not knowing every artist and which ones to look for. To narrow your search down to start with, as I say, narrow yourself down to the labels. Look for the labels first. Once you get a record that's worth $400 or $500, you're going to probably be hooked on doing this, and you'll do a better job on researching. Going in and looking at a group of a couple thousand records is a daunting task when you don't know what to look for. So narrow yourself down right off the bat. Again, I'm telling you right now, you're going to miss some. Most people miss records, and that's why I still sometimes look through some of these batches, because I look for every area that I can possibly imagine that's worth something, and I know kind of what to look for. I know the labels, or I know the artists that show up very scarcely. I've looked at millions of records probably in my day, so that's why I can get away with this. But I started off just where you were, not knowing anything on records. And I learned really quickly that labels are the best key judge on what to look for. Again, if you've seen the label and you see it all the time, chances are it's not worth messing with. Just a fact of the matter. So, and obviously there are some differences in what to look for. If you see records in sleeves, for the most part, they're worth more than the records without sleeves. But more high-dollar records were not issued with sleeves, like these Starday or this one Unlucky. It never had a sleeve. It just had a plain paper sleeve. These are small individual companies that printed these, not national companies like Corel. That's Coral, that's a national company. They had a ton of records out. Johnny Burnett Trio is a different story. Again, Rockabilly. So, but Johnny Burnett records, for the most part, aren't worth a ton of money. It's just a rarity here. These are all scarce records for the most part. You see, the labels are even scarce. Stardy's a more common one, but it's still a scarce one. This class here is a common, or more common, I should say. You're going to run across these. But every one of these labels you're looking at here, you want to know. You want to be able to search these out and be able to just pull these labels out. Just what you see here. I don't want you to be spending hours looking for stuff that you're just not going to make money on. Records are a big, huge money maker for us. It's a big chunk of our business. At least 10% of what we sell are records. So, this is what you want to. I would never buy a lot of records off of eBay, though. I never do it. I never have done it. I don't do it. It's just not worth the time because people look through these and then they throw up the oddball ones. I have record lots up now myself. So, and we sell those and still make good money on those too. But I'll sell 125 records or 130 records, 200 records in a big lot. That's how we make money. But again, Rockabilly and Soul. Look through these two areas. This will narrow your look down on 45s immediately. And just cover these labels. Again, there are some that are from major labels that are scarce. Like this is an MGM, but this is an Italian version. The chances of you running into this are so slim. This is probably a handful of these were ever pressed. Maybe an exec had them out or something. But this is what you want to do. Again, these are all, let's see if I see any that are common labels in this high dollar group. So far, everyone on here, other than this Dunhill, is a very common label, but Willie Hutch it's a very scarce one. It's a limited run, limited pressing Soul. So again, you might miss that one, but you're going to center in on these, like Rama. That's a good label, but there's a ton of them. But almost the majority of Rama labels are worth something. So I buy every Rama label that I see for the most part. There's some that I know in my head that aren't worth it. Again, everyone I'm looking at, I do look like they're all non-common labels. Yeah. So this is what you want to do. Excel is another one that's a little different because Excel does have a ton of labels and a ton of records on the Excel that aren't worth anything at all. But this was one you'd always want to look at, the Excel label. Fillmore Sound shows up semi-often. But this is what I did, what I learned, and how I learned to make money on selling records. I looked at the labels. I knocked off all the ones that I didn't want to mess with, and I made a ton of money by doing it. Now, Polydor, it has tons of labels. Swan has tons of labels. But again, once you've done this for a while, you're going to figure out after looking at a couple hundred Swans that the same ones show up constantly and they're not worth much. So when you see one that you haven't seen ever after looking at records for a long time, you're going to know which ones, even under each individual label, to pull out. You're going to see the same ones over and over and over and over again. Like Stang, that's a very common label. It's an oddball name, though. It's someone you would have never heard of. That's why that one would be something to look up for. Let's see, like this one here, Harvey Vern Dozen. Have you heard of him? No. Pull that one out. It's a soul label, so let's pull that one out and look at it. That's what you're going to do. I think this is the Palmer label. Yeah, this is Palmer. These show up around here. There was a Palmer press plant, I believe. But again, the JT Rhythm, never heard of it. You probably never heard of it. I've heard of it, but you've never heard of it. So look that one up. Ad-libs, you've probably never heard of it. Look that one up. If it's somebody you haven't heard of on one of these oddball labels, that's what you want to do. Soundstage 7, that's a fairly common one. But Little Richie, if it has the word little in it, it's not Little Richard, pull it out and look at it. Little Anthony, though, is fairly common, but some of the Little Anthonys still sell. So words like that, little, or things like adjectives to describe some of the artists are worth pulling out too. Like Junior McCant, Little Stanley, Little whatever, Little Eva. All those ones are worth looking over and looking at. But just do a search and look through here. If it has Detroit on it and you've never heard of the label or something along that line, pull it out and look at it too. Detroit has a lot of small town labels that are worth some money. But again, Cleveland Robinson Jr., have you heard of him? No. It's got Junior at the end. It's got an adjective. It's describing the person better. Again, the word the Superbs. And this is going to give you a good start. Spend, an hour when you're just doing nothing and listening to something or something and look through the labels here. That's what you're going to need to do to get this down. Now, Tamla is a common label, but this version of Tamla is not. So you're not going to have seen this label very often. Tasty Hasty. You just got to look through these. They're all oddball ones that sell high. They're all ones, for the most part. Mira, though, shows up. But again, you're not going to see Mira very often, so pull all the Miras out. Pull them all out and look through them. Again, the word the Martells. All the groups that sound like that, the Martells, the Marvels, the Marvettes, all of the ones with the that sound like that are usually worth looking into, especially if they're rare labels, ones that you don't see. Everyone on here is a scarce label. I've seen most of these myself because I've gone to record shows and things like that. I don't do it anymore, but these show up in scarcity, and you're going to run into these from time to time. Twirl, I've sold some Twirl labels for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So Twirl's a scarce one, but it doesn't show up that often. So pull out every Twirl you see. Maybe not mess with Polydor unless it's some really weird, bizarre named group, like Mojoba, something like that. Mad Dog Fantasy, oddball names. They're not people names, they're weird group names. The weird group names sell higher than most other things too. The Oxford Knights, weird group name. Vivian Carroll, you've never heard of Vivian Carroll, so pull that one out. The Bourbon, that's an unknown label. The Blue Jays, where they're sold. It's on a J label, another rare label. Peachtree. Now, Peachtree shows up. J shows up occasionally, but these are all oddball names, oddball labels, oddball groups. That's what you're looking for. Look for the bizarre name. If it has soul in the name of the actual record label, Soul Track, pull that one out. Soulhawk, Blackhawk, all of those are good labels to look for. Soul Town. Soul and Soul, any of these kind of labels that have that in there. Now again, Columbia has records that are worth money. Now this is a promo, so that's a little different. It's a white label. If you ever see WL in the title, that means white label. Now Turley Richards. Now again, these are going to be oddball people. You've never heard of Turley Richards. Now you're going to be pulling out in the beginning tons of records of people you've never heard of that are very, very common, and you just don't know that yet. So that's why I say look for the labels first. Always pull out the oddball scarce labels or the really, really weird group names. Four Buddies, for the most part, doesn't sell, but on the Savoy label it does. You've probably not run into a Savoy label. So, pull that Savoy label. Pull out the W label. Pull out the Jerry or Colt label. Just look at these. I mean, that's what you're going to have to do. This is the best bet I can tell you on narrowing these down. I know some I've already talked to that have bought in some lots, and they did okay on the lots. They did enough to make their money and make some decent money back to want to still do this. Some people are going to give up. That's why it's not a problem me telling you this, because too many people give up doing this. It's just too hard, or they don't want to put the legwork in and the time into researching these. But this is what I did. This is how I learned to make money religiously. I make money on records every single day of the week, every single day. And this is how I did it. I learned by looking at these labels. I learned what labels are scarce, what labels you're not going to run into. Malico shows up, but Patterson Twins. Have you ever heard of Patterson Twins? Chances are you've never even heard of them. Rivage. Again, have you heard of them? Have you ever seen the label? No. Pick out the ones that you don't know. You don't know the name. You haven't heard of them. Mela. It's a common label, but they do have some in there that are worth some money. Tony Middleton, he shows up on other labels that you might run into. Amy, that's a common label, but again, Morris Chestnut. Have you heard of Morris Chestnut? Sometimes you can tell by the song title, by the colloquialness of the title, I guess you'd call it. So you can tell sometimes by that on what kind of music it is, and that helps you too. Soul songs sell the best. Rockabilly sell right up in there too. So again, these are what you're going to need to look for. Congress, it's a fairly common label for the most part, but you've got Richie Adams. I've had that one. I know it sells. It's easily a $500 record wherever you go. These are all record labels that are scarce. These are all ones that you want to look for the most part. Hang on, I just missed one down here to show you. But these are all record labels for the most part that show up very scarcely. This Cap one, you might see the label, but again, you're not going to see the group name. It's called The Exits is the name of the group. It's got the in the title. It's a weird title. It's somebody you've never heard of. That's my best bet to narrow your search down right off the bat. Don't mess with the stuff that that you've heard of all the time. The Velvets. Benny Curtis. Have you ever heard of Benny Curtis? Have you ever even seen a Resist label? Probably no. So these are what you want to look for. Look for the ones, that you're not seeing every day. The labels that are rare. That's going to make you the most money the quickest, and it's going to cut down your search time immensely. You're going to just be able to cut down the labels. A fraternity label, that's from the local area, so I do see this one all the time. But imaginations, have I seen the imaginations lately? No, I haven't. Again, so these are just records of labels you've never seen and artists you've never heard of. And the first 4 or 5 pages at 200 per page are going to have records of people you've never heard of. The Aristocrats. Have you heard of them? There's a movie by Disney that's called that, but it has nothing to do with this. Selma. Have you heard of the Selma label? No. Nat Brown. No, you've probably never heard of that. This is going to be how you're going to narrow down your search quickly. Look for the artists and the labels that you've never heard of. Willie Kendrick. Look for the name. Sometimes the name will give you a hint whether it's a soul artist or a country artist. So, that's what you're going to need to do, is kind of to narrow down what you're looking for. Oddball names. Magic City. That's a local one. It shows up around here. Northern Soul is what they call it, but you can limit your search down just by going soul. But again, that's your best bet. Narrow it down by the type of music and the label for the most part. That's going to give you the quickest return on your investment. The MVPs, have you heard of the MVPs? Probably not. John St. John, no. Again, these are all oddball names. Bill Brandon on a weird oddball label. Have you heard of that label? No. Piedmont, that's a commoner label. This is a newer one, though, but still, there are new ones from the 80s that sound this range, but they're going to be oddball groups. The Mix, have you heard of them? No, you haven't. Herb Ward. This label is fairly common, Argo, but again, it's not anybody you're going to have heard of. This is just what you're going to be looking for. If it's on RCA, if it's on Capitol, most of those aren't worth much money, unless it's an oddball named group. That's the key to this, the oddball stuff. Oddball labels, oddball artists are where you're going to make your money on. It's just a fact of nature. But again, that's just a real rough here. We'll talk about records again. I'll do many videos, once, at least a month or a couple times a month, I'll do a video on records to kind of narrow you in on once you're getting the hang of this. Once you get a high dollar record, I promise you're going to want to do this more and be looking more into this, and you'll invest more of your time into this. You're going to see how quick and how easy you can flip a record and how many records there are for sale across your area. There isn't an area I haven't been to that I haven't found a ton of records at. Every city, every town, every thrift store I go to, I see records at. So anyway, that's the gist of it here. Hopefully that gives you some ideas.
Well, there you go. That's an explanation on some of the records to look for. Hopefully that gives you some ideas. Hopefully that was a big help for explaining some of the aspects on records and what you need to look for. Hopefully that gives you some real good ideas. But if you liked the video, please hit the like button below, subscribe, comment, and tell a friend.